Okay, we're here talking about X-Men Dark Phoenix. And, well, anyone who's been paying attention kind of already knows kind of the atmosphere around this movie. And, it was kind of the same atmosphere that I think a lot of people had going in. I definitely did not want to enter this movie sort of like, I didn't want to go in it's like wanting to hate it or wanting to rag on it or whatever. I had, as usual, like my turn of phrase that I've been using for a long time is high hopes, low expectations. Just because none of the trailers really sold it well. It seemed like it was going to be more apocalypse. And Malik will give his opinion in a moment, but for me, thinking on it, having only seen it the one time, I do feel like it was kind of more apocalypse. And there are definitely differences. I definitely feel like it's an improvement over apocalypse. If I'll maybe get into why I feel that way later, but spoilers, I guess, for my X-Men sort of like series review video, just because I'm not sure which of these two is going to come out first. This and Apocalypse are my bottom two. I had actually finished recording most of, or actually the entire ranking video before I saw Dark Phoenix, and so I went back and changed the video after having seen it because I figured, why not just give my own little spoiler-free thoughts as part of that list. And yeah, thinking on it, I like this one less than Origins. I like it way less than Last Stand. I feel like Last Stand is by far not just the better movie on every level, but also the better Dark Phoenix adaptation, which is saying a lot because Last Stand is not a good Dark Phoenix adaptation.
I don't agree with you at all there, but we'll get into it.
Yeah, that's just because, like, I'll get into, like, plot stuff as we go, but my big thing, just as far as this being an adaptation of Last Phoenix, the adaptation of Dark Phoenix, sorry, is that I don't feel like Dark Phoenix, like, happens in this movie. Like, I feel like you could tell this story with any character who's kind of, like, not in control of their powers. Like, there's nothing about this movie that I felt needed to be Jean Grey and the Phoenix. Like, it doesn't feel like that story on any level. Or like this was a story that needed to be told with this character specifically. And part of that is just that I still don't feel like the new characters, the quote unquote new characters from Apocalypse, are very well defined still, so I still don't know entirely who this Jean is. I don't know. There's a lot to get into, but like I'm really not hot on it, and I feel like the title character, the title storyline is a big part of why. So like I don't know, how do you feel about it?
I like this movie a lot more than most people do. Um, it's littered with issues, but I'm really enjoying the movie despite that. I just came back from my second viewing of the film, and I have a really hard time saying that I hate this movie. It's not good, but it's not bad either. And in my opinion, it definitely is better than Last Stand, and it definitely is a better adaptation of that story. Well, see, I can't fully say that. Have you actually read the Dark Phoenix story?
Yeah, it was a
Okay, you've actually read it. I have not actually read it. I've just done a lot of research into it,
mm,
and from what I understand, having read that story, um, that is like very like a cosmic, almost space opera kind of story.
oh yeah,
And this isn't that either, but it gets a hell of a lot closer than the Last Stand did. Last Stand made quote unquote Dark Phoenix something that came specifically from Jean Grey. Like the Dark Phoenix is kind of just all Jean, just a weird repressed personality of her, basically. And in this movie, even though we are basically retconning the very last film where she used the Phoenix out of nowhere. Like, we are actually doing the whole it's a space, it's a cosmic entity that inhabits her. We are doing that. It's a weird hybrid of both that story and Last Stand, as far as I can tell. But I found myself just enjoying this movie more. I think this movie is a little more cohesive. Again, it's littered with problems, but I think this is a better movie than that. I like it more than Last Stand. I like it more than Origins. And I like it more than Apocalypse, so I can't put it under any of those movies. I think it's right above all those movies. And I don't know, this is it's certainly a lackluster note to end the franchise as a whole on. There's a lot about this movie that I really like, even though there's a lot about this movie that really doesn't work.
No, kids, I'll get into specifics about like stuff that I don't think works, but I think you're making a really good point as far as like defending the idea of this as the better adaptation. And I think we're just maybe taking two different approaches, because you're absolutely right that it adapts like plot elements not well, but better than Last Stand did, as far as space and the Phoenix being a separate entity, even though we retcon that, and like aliens being involved in the story and stuff like that. On those levels, it's adapting it better. I'm thinking it's a better Dark Phoenix adaptation, just Last Stand, I mean, as far as actually having the story be about Jean Grey like becoming this sort of malevolent entity, and the Dark Phoenix is just like a destructive force that the X-Men have to stop. And that's what I mean by like that never happens. Like there's no moment in this movie, there's maybe half a scene of this film where it's actually kind of evil Jean Grey, out of control Dark Phoenix attacking the X-Men. That happens in like half of a scene. Where
I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's her with Magneto and then her with Charles. And like that whole interaction is the closest we get in the whole movie to, oh no, Jean is the Dark Phoenix and is a problem and kind of sort of the antagonist. Last Stand just goes there. And again, that's not like one-to-one what the comics were doing. With the comics, it was kind of just like, there are other antagonists, and the Dark Phoenix is never like the villain. But I feel like what Last Stand was doing, as far as like, no, the Dark Phoenix is a problem. Jean has kind of become an issue and she's just destroying things, and she and the X-Men are kind of opposed. Like, I think that's more to the core of the story, and more like, I think if you were gonna do Dark Phoenix the premise, yes, do the space opera stuff, but also do, like, you know, Dark Phoenix. And okay. I don't think that happens here.
That's fair. In a weird way, you're right. Like, she isn't really I mean, the alien people kind of more or less end up being the villains of the movie.
Yeah, definitely.
She's not really a villain. She's kind of just a semi-antagonistic force for like 2/3 of the film.
Because like before the Magneto and Charles scene, pretty much every scene of her losing control prior to that, I feel like the audience is meant to be like firmly on her side. Like it's not even ambiguous.
I don't know about that. I don't know if we're supposed to be necessarily on her side,
or sympathetic with her, at least.
Yeah, the movie wants us to be sympathetic to her, absolutely. But we're not really seeing a downward spiral of someone turning evil. We're just seeing someone have kind of a panic attack over and over.
Yeah, I think what we're watching is someone have like power and confidence. And again, that's part of what I feel like you could tell this story with almost anyone. Where I think part of the issue is, and this is also just, there are scenes in the trailers or like lines of dialogue in the trailers for this movie that aren't in the film, which kind of hurt the point even more, where it's like the one trailer that opens with the line right after Mystique has died, and she's like, "Why did you make me do that?" Where it's like clear that Jean is talking to some entity inside of her that is really forcing her to do these things. And that I don't think is clear in the movie proper, that there
No.
is a living sort of consciousness that is not Jean that is influencing her actions. Like you said, it just comes off like panic attacks. So there's never a moment where I'm like, she's like, I feel like I had this thought where I'm like, you could tell this story if you wanted to with Jubilee, just like contrive something to where like her fireworks go out of control at random intervals and she can't control it, and she like tries to run away and stuff. Like, I think you could tell this story with anyone whose powers are sufficiently destructive, and I don't think a Dark Phoenix movie should feel that way.
Well, that's fair, Nick. My thing is, this movie was kind of doomed to fail from premise. Because doing this story again, if you're going to do it and make it at all satisfying for people like you and people like me who know that story fairly well, even though they haven't read it, you have to build up to it. Dark Phoenix is not something you can just do in 2 hours.
Yep.
You can't pull that off in a satisfying way. You just can't. Marvel, they did essentially their version of Infinity Gauntlet. They built to it.
Yeah.
You have to build to something like Dark Phoenix if you're going to do it, and do it in a satisfying way for people who are familiar with that story.
And like, you could is I don't want I be one of those people who sort of like says that the sort of Marvel method is the only way that you can do this kind of thing, where it's like, when we get to Last Stand, if Last Stand was, better adaptation, if Last Stand was more direct Dark Phoenix, I still think that would have worked better, just because the previous 2 movies hadn't done a great job in endearing everyone to specific characters. Like Jean again was still kind of vaguely defined, but it did a better job. I guess like I'm sort of walking around my main point, which is I think this movie could have worked in 2 hours if Apocalypse was better, and if Apocalypse did a better job sort of like really endearing everyone to the new Jean and the new Cyclops.
But that's the thing, it didn't.
Yeah.
And because of that, you don't have a solid foundation to build off of with this movie.
Yeah. So like, if Apocalypse being the way it is, then you're right, we needed like stuff in between to really get these characters before we start like breaking what's already there. It's like, who cares? Like, who cares what breaks, because we don't know any of these people.
Yeah, like if we started this movie already endeared to their version of Scott and Jean and them as a couple,
Yeah.
a lot of this movie works way better.
Yeah, and it's really the 2 of them, because I'll get into how I feel like Quicksilver and Nightcrawler and Storm are completely shafted.
Yeah.
But it's really all that matters as far as a Dark Phoenix thing is we gotta have Scott and Jean, and we gotta care about the 2 of them. I feel like you could rewrite this movie with the 2 of them not being in a romantic relationship at all, and it would impact nothing. And that is not something that I should be able to say.
Yeah, it feels, I don't know, it feels really, I mean, I guess the only reason, like, that has any kind of resonance whatsoever is because towards the end, when she's trying to kill the alien, her power gets out of control and she nearly hurts Scott in the process.
Oh yeah, that happened.
Yeah, and she gives this look like, oh no, I can't hurt him. And so she flies up and kills the alien in space.
Yeah, like that so quick, and even then you could maybe still make the argument of like, if he was just a friend that she really, really cared about, she could still have that.
No, but that's the thing. It only happens to Scott, and she looks very intently at Scott.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, like, have it still happen to Scott, but have it just be like they aren't in a relationship yet, or she just really, really loves him.
But why? But see, that doesn't really make sense, and it doesn't have the dramatic impact that you're going for when you think about it. Because if they're not together in that context, I think it makes more sense to like have it be Professor Xavier because of the whole thing with him and what he did to her in her past. Have have him lock eyes with her, and he's kind of getting hurt because of what she's doing. That would make more sense in that scene. But because they're a couple in this movie, and they expect you to care about that, Scott's the one we do that with.
You're right. I think either one of them would work, and if they weren't a couple, Charles would work better. But even then, that's still only highlighting the fact that like what we have now, I don't think works. So
That's true.
yeah, so I don't know. Like a lot of this, like so much of this, is stuff that like other problems I'm gonna go into is stuff that I feel like I could get around if I cared about Jean and Scott. Like the two of them really had to work to land this the way that it's, trying to be, and they just don't.
I kind of want to pluck away at my issues with this movie that have a little less to do with Jean and more with other stuff.
Yeah, let's do those.
Okay, first one. This is the big one. This is the big issue for me that doesn't really have anything to do with Jean, but the fact that they did it, I'm not going to say it's insulting, but I think it's the biggest missed opportunity in the movie if you were going to do it at all. And that's Genosha.
Oh, right.
Genosha is a footnote in this movie.
And like it's because it sorry. If it weren't for the credits, I don't think anyone would even assume that was Genosha. I didn't until
I knew immediately that's what it was supposed to be. But even then, it doesn't make sense because one of the first things Magneto says is, this land was given to us by the government. In the comics, Magneto finds that land and cultivates that kind of separate society himself. Given the ending of Apocalypse, and that he nearly helped Apocalypse himself, try to wipe out the world, it doesn't make sense that the government would give him that.
Yeah. Typically him. I mean, Charles is like tight with government. Maybe he put in a good word. It's been however many years, and we do another 9-10 year jump again for no reason. Like there's no reason that this story couldn't either be set back in the 80s again or closer to now. Like there really is no reason for it to take place in 92, but that's a different thing. Then put a pin in that. I'll get back to that in a minute. But getting back to Genosha again, something I'm kind of vague on actually is because I know that there's two sort of like mutant sort of like havens that Magneto becomes involved with. One of them is Utopia, which might actually be the thing that you're describing, because I thought Genosha was the thing where it was like, it started as a prison island, and then Magneto kind of like hostile takeover? Or am I mixing those two up?
You might be. I only know of Genosha from Wolverine and the X-Men. And in that series, Magneto just has it. And
I think
he has prisoners on that island who don't follow his rhetoric. He just throws them in a dungeon. But there's no implication that that's what it was before he took it over.
Okay, yeah, so maybe I'm just misremembering that. But yeah, aside from that, you're right. It's such a weird... Like, okay, like putting aside that the concept of Genosha and like finally after all these movies of can mutants and humans kind of like work together in society, the idea that it occurs to someone, let's just take all the mutants and live somewhere else by choice, that could be its own movie. Putting that aside, it's so weird. You're right that they would give it to Magneto, and that the character, I'm not sure I buy that. I don't know. I kind of buy that Magneto coming off of Apocalypse is just like, you know what? This has been getting me nowhere. I keep losing everything. I'm just gonna go off by myself, live peacefully. Like, if I can't have peace from humans and I can't have peace with humans, then I'll just go and be alone. And like with whatever mutants want to come along.
Yeah, I buy that that's what he would do,
But that
but
any
the issue is that needs to be its own film. Like you can't like do Genosha. Genosha could be a movie by itself, but you can't do that properly and Dark Phoenix in the same movie.
especially as a little 5 minutes off to the side, it's just the space where we're gonna have Magneto. It's just the setting where we establish Magneto in this movie. That's really all it is.
Yeah.
And okay, so here's a very tiny problem.
Hmm.
Uh, Someone brought up a really good point in a sort of forum that I was following, where it's like we have the whole scene where Jean goes over to Genosha and talks with Eric, and he gets like, "Whose blood is that? Whose blood is that?" How exactly did Jean get Raven's blood on her? Because
Well, she's skewered or what?
yeah, but she's like a good like couple of yards away, and she doesn't get like any closer after Raven gets skewered. So it's like it's a little bit of a leap that she even got blood like right on her shirt anyhow. But like again, that's like the nitpickiest of nitpicks.
Yeah.
Another small issue I have tying back to the thing I put a pin in earlier is as part of the whole why did this have to be set when it is thing, it feels kind of like out of step with the previous movies, but specifically First Class and Days of Future Past, where those movies are really, really leaning into the time period, and the fact that they take place when they do is really important to the story. And like in Days of Future Past, we have President Nixon, and that's a good, solid grounding into okay, this is taking place in some kind of reality. We can relate this to the 70s. And here it's like we're in 1992 and we just have President whoever. It's like, I don't know, that feels kind of weird. Where it's like suddenly these movies are doing a very different thing where we're
I
still
don't know if it's necessarily very different. They're just not making the time period as relevant as they were previously.
yeah, like relevant as not relevant. Like the 80s you could argue in Apocalypse is relevant at least as far as like Apocalypse has a whole thing with nukes, and we do establish there that Reagan is the president, so that's still a thing, and like the style of it, and Scott and Jean and Kurt all to varying, then Jubilee for as little as she's in it, all to varying degrees feel like 80s kids. But here it's like if we were gonna do the thing where we jump ahead and no one has aged a day, then we might as well have just set it in 2019 for as different as this story would be.
Okay, I don't agree with that at all. I do not agree with that at all.
What
Um,
do
you
you
don't
think?
have to set it exactly now.
You don't have
And
to. I'm not saying they should have necessarily, but they could have. Like, what part of any of this movie needed to be a period thing at all?
because the other previous two were, and like we are picking and choosing what we want to take continuity from the previous films. Like I said, they retcon Jean using the Phoenix in the last movie
Complete
in
with,
Apocalypse.
complete with.
But at the same time, at the same token, the previous movies were period pieces, and so to jump out of that entirely and make it ambiguous again, I think is weird.
Yeah, I
Um,
get.
I think you're making a bigger deal out of the whole time period thing than it really matters to the
I think
story.
my just that it's it says something. I think it's kind of a problem again, like you mentioned earlier, from premise, like from the right out of the gate, the approach is okay. We're not gonna do anything at all with the time period. That just seems like a wasted opportunity.
That's fair, I guess, but um, I don't know. The plot of Days of Future Past and First Class were very. I don't know. They found a way to weave in what was going on back then into the story.
Yeah.
And with Dark Phoenix, is there really any super relevant like of the time stuff going on in that story?
Uh, particularly that I can recall.
And that's my point. Like
I don't know, because
they,
kind of
I don't think the story that they're trying to adapt even really warrants that. Like I don't feel like that's a necessary thing that you have to make a big deal out of the time period you're set in.
true. Now that I'm thinking, this also brings me back to what we were already talking about, which I don't want to like go in circles, but sort of to rephrase what we were saying earlier, it doesn't really make sense to do Dark Phoenix without just doing the Phoenix, and that was also Last Stand's problem, where you got me thinking about how there's not necessarily anything about the Dark Phoenix saga that is specific to the time period it was released in, but we begin the plain old Phoenix saga. The genesis of that is a Sentinel story, and the Sentinels are always kind of like relevant to the 60s and 70s, and it's just like we don't have to do that, but I do think we should have done on some level a story that is the Phoenix, and again, like Jean should be the focal point of a movie or several before this. That's just like, okay, she's getting accustomed to this power and she's able to kind of control it to a degree and use it for good, and she's really cool. And at first, the Phoenix seems like a really good thing. And then the Dark Phoenix happens, and it's like, oh no, the circumstances have made it to where this is now suddenly a real problem. And yeah, I don't know. But again, just getting back to the point that this needed some real setup, and it doesn't have any.
Yeah, I do also want to look at this from the standpoint of just as a movie,
Mm-hmm.
because like tonight I saw it with my aunt, and she loves superhero films. She loves X-Men in particular, and she really enjoyed it. And as I'm sure you can imagine, she hasn't touched a comic book a day in her life.
Mm,
So she doesn't know all the ins and outs of the backstory and the comics that are based on knowledge. She didn't know any of that, and she enjoyed it and was able to follow it fairly well. I mean, it is a pretty straightforward, simple, maybe even overly simplified story.
yeah,
Um,
that's another matter of adaptation where it's just like scale, where it's like this is a very sort of contained. I mean, like we go to space and there are aliens, and we can talk about the aliens when we get to them, but like putting aside those elements, it's a very grounded, human, very, very straightforward, dramatic story. And you can argue, like, do you want to do that with this material? When it should be like the appeal for a lot of people is that it's a big, grand, like story with lots of consequences for lots of people and stuff.
yeah, it's certainly not what fans of the original stories would want to see, and probably why, um, like that group of people in particular has torn this thing to shreds. But I think just on its own as a film, it's perfectly watchable. It's perfectly um, fine, even though, again, as I said, I do have a lot of issues with this movie. When we
Mm.
got into Genosha, the fact that they did it but didn't really do it at all, and it was kind of just a footnote. My other big issue is, well, I can't even call this a big issue, but I didn't like this. I did not like. Okay, I'm actually of two minds about this. Oddly enough, I can't even. Now that I'm thinking about it, I can't even really call this an issue.
Yourself, even
What's up?
you're sort of out of your own.
Yeah, I'm arguing with myself a little bit, but follow me here. Mystique. I think um, Jennifer Lawrence is giving a. I think she's given the best performance here since she first played this role in First Class, because she doesn't feel like she's completely over it, and that's probably partially because she knows she's not going to have to be doing a lot of scenes, and they really scaled down the makeup because she didn't feel like doing her job and just wearing the costume, like the whole get up.
Mm.
So the makeup is severely downgraded so that she doesn't have to spend nearly as much time in a makeup chair, and she spends most of the movie untransformed anyway. And
I have that, And I will say, just to bring it up, I really liked her performance in Days of Future Past. I feel like she was giving a solid effort in that movie. But yeah, did I interrupt? I didn't mean to like stop your point part way.
Yeah, sure. It's okay. Yeah, I think she's giving a really solid performance here. Probably because she knows she's not going to be in the movie all that long, and I feel like she is, I don't know, to a degree, kind of overplaying this character. And that scene she has with Charles, I was kind of with it until we got to the obnoxious. Maybe you should change it to X women line.
Okay, I agree about that line. Do you know my sort of like political leanings or whatever? I'm very, very liberal. And even I found that line obnoxious just because it's not true. Like, she's like, the women are always saving the men around here. And it's like, but where? I mean, Jean did ultimately end up being the thing that stopped Apocalypse. And she helped with the, she did the big thing in the space mission. But like looking back through all of these movies, like put aside whatever the previous continuity that we sort of retconned in Days of Future Past. Look at that movie. Like Mystique is a woman, and she's about to ruin everything, and she has to basically have her soul saved by Charles. And back to First Class, like not to rag on her contributions in that movie, but the men do the heavy lifting in that film. So, like, what is she even talking about?
Yeah, I would love to know all these instances where the women came in and saved the men versus when the men did the saving. I mean, I really, like, especially in today's climate, I really resist when we have to make everything a political statement in a film. And it's not like I don't want that in my movies at all. Like, I think um, Captain America: Winter Soldier was able to talk about the issues with surveillance and how much protection is too much protection and that kind of thing without being overly preachy.
Yeah,
You know?
like all art is political, whether it means to be or not. But if you're gonna like stop in the middle of a scene to be like, here's our political statement, at least make it kind of like jive. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, and it definitely doesn't jive.
Yeah. And actually, okay, so like before, I don't want to move on from that scene because I hate that line, but I also, you like the rest of that scene. I do not like the rest of that scene at all because I feel like Mystique's character has done a complete unexplained 180 from Apocalypse, and it's insane. Like, I want someone to watch this movie and Apocalypse like back to back, no interruptions, and tell me that Mystique's character makes any sense here. Where her whole thing with Charles in this scene is like, you put you put us in danger, you put those kids in danger. Literally the last lines of dialogue in period in the last movie were you talking to the others saying, you're not kids anymore, you're not students, you're X-Men. I'm the one who's like arguing with Charles. You've got to get these guys ready for like a war or for whatever hardship they're gonna face. You can't coddle them. You got to start getting them ready to be like a task force or whatever. And
Yikes.
yeah, and then this movie, she's the one who's suddenly like, this is too dangerous. They're just kids. And also, I really dislike the fact that both she and Beast decide to like look human when they enter the mansion. Where it's like, have I told you about this yet? Like my real problem with that, which is like, okay, Jennifer Lawrence and Nicholas Hoult don't want to be in the makeup chair all day. Understandable. If you're gonna pick and choose the scenes where you look all blue and weird, why would you pick this scene to be the one where you look normal? Where it's like, okay, outside for the press, I'll look blue and whatever. And, you know, mutant and proud. Mutant and proud has been her whole thing through all these movies, but fine. And as soon as you enter the environment where there are a bunch of impressionable mutant kids who look up to you, and some of them doubtless don't look all that normal, that's when you're gonna be like, have a little bit of shame and be like, okay, now I'm gonna look like everyone else does and not embrace what makes me unique in front
Well,
of.
see, that's the thing. Apocalypse is where Jennifer Lawrence's ego really kicks in, and the whole mutant and proud thing is basically gone.
Is it though? Because even then, like, this might not be what Jennifer Lawrence intended or whatever, but we have the scene where, like, she shows up at the mansion looking normal and everyone's asking what the deal is, and she's like, the the world is just showing me that I can't, I don't want the attention, I don't want whatever. And then like the explosion happens and she just kind of like jarred into looking like herself, and that's when everyone starts looking at her and being like, oh, it's Mystique, it's the hero, like I look up to her. And then we make a point of having her look blue and scaly throughout like the last big action scene where she has the big empowering speech of like, embrace your powers. And then she's blue and scaly in the very last scene of the movie where she's like, you're X-Men, this is mission statement, this is what we are now, like I'm gonna teach you how to embrace your powers and stuff. And so like just the scenes, if I get it, in Apocalypse Jennifer Lawrence doesn't want to be in the makeup all the time, but it feels like at least in that movie they were smart about when she was in the makeup, so that the scenes where she does look like Mystique, it makes sense to be like, okay, this is a bit of a character arc. And here it's like, nope, just forget it. Just like the just complete 180, completely diametrically opposed to her character in Apocalypse. And it's
Well, this has less to do with this movie and more to do with Days of Future Past. But the like Mystique being like this like person that people look up to and everything that we get in Apocalypse,
that
that
doesn't.
does not make any sense. And I agree with Eric when, like, I think he and Cap did like, it was either a commentary or a review.
Yeah, it was a
Basically, Mystique like holds the president at gunpoint.
Mhm.
Whether she pulls that trigger or not, that was on camera. The whole world saw that. There is no way that you can convince me that that same person is heralded a hero not even 2 years later.
Yeah, like putting that, you're absolutely correct. But like that's actually separate from what I feel like is the issue here, where it's like the whole world's kind of looking at Mystique like a hero and being like, she's helped like human mutant relations. That doesn't make a lick of sense in Apocalypse, and that's that movie's problem. But here, starting from the premise of Mystique is an X-Men, and the X-Men are all collectively sort of like admired by Charles's students, because of course they would be, then for her and Beast to come in and be like, the signifiers of us as mutants, this is where we're gonna like shed that? That makes no sense to me.
Not at all. No.
Especially since we've established that it takes effort for her to do that. So, what is she thinking?
And there's a quite a bit of scenes just in this movie in general that don't make sense. Like when Jean leaves the mansion and goes to speak with her father, and then the X-Men show up. Police cars show up for no reason. Like we don't even know why they're there or why they're there to arrest Jean or what they got the call for or what.
Yeah, you're
And
right.
then Jean just waves her hand and says, "Leave me alone," and proceeds to kill those cops for
Yeah,
no reason.
I totally forgot. There's like no one calls them. They just no. There's nothing to prompt the police to show up. They're just there,
Yeah, we need an action beat here. Cops are here out of nowhere.
which is still which. This is not necessarily a negative point about the movie. This is just kind of a neutral statement, and we kind of also said something similar about Endgame, which is that this isn't really an action movie until the third act. Like the first two acts are almost completely devoid of standard like action fight scenes. And if that's the idea with the police thing, is that they wanted an action beat, and so that's why we have them show up and sort of like push Jean that little bit further, then that didn't quite pay off because that's not really an action scene either. Like, that doesn't become an action scene. She kind of blows a couple of them away, and she does the thing with Quicksilver, which we can talk about, and she and Kurt kind of confront each other for like 2 seconds, and then she kills Mystique and she's out of there. That wasn't really an action scene.
I gotta ask you a question about that scene.
Yeah.
Do you think that it would have been too gimmicky for them to give us another like extended like Quicksilver running around in slow-mo scene?
I think it would be too gimmicky if, like Apocalypse did, they had it be like him listening to music in his headphones again. That would have been the thing that made it too much, but like taking that element out of it, I don't think so, because that's just his powers. Like,
okay,
if you don't want everything he does to be over in like 2 seconds in the little blink of an eye, then we have to see things from his perspective. So that's how you do that.
I thought her being able to move the debris out of the way so he couldn't step on it and then he'd fall out. I thought that was a cool moment, but I was upset that screwed him up so bad that like that's just our way of getting him out of the movie.
And like the whole movie, he's out until the very end.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just he's overpowered. But like this again, we've been saying this isn't really an action conflict until the aliens kind of like make their presence known. If you want to like knock him out around the third act so that he can't help out with the fight scene, then fine, that works. But as it's just, I think it speaks to like how little they had in mind for anyone except for Jean, Eric, Charles, and somewhat Scott and Hank, to where everyone else is just kind of hanging around, to where like, okay, we didn't have anything for Peter to do anyway, so we might as well contrive an action beat just to get him out of the story.
And while we're on the topic of action, I know you're typically a tougher critic of action scenes than I am, and I don't love every action scene in the world. I do think action can be done poorly, and sometimes it is done poorly, and I could give a few examples, but I thought the action in this movie was not the best, but some of the best in the whole franchise.
Yeah,
the little action that we did get, particularly with Magneto.
Yeah, when we mainly confined to the street outside of Jean's, the wherever she and the aliens go, that street, it's confined to that scene and the train. I think the street fight is mainly just okay. I think the train fight is really cool and really impressive.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
And one of my favorite shots in this movie is just Magneto levitating a bunch of rifles. That was so cool. That's so Magneto, and particularly this version of Magneto. Like, I don't know if I've never seen that like be a big thing in the comics that he uses a bunch of guns, but it really fits like this cinematic version of Magneto to constantly be using guns.
Like every doesn't that really cool, from the guns to sort of like just ripping bits and pieces of metal around to sort of like manipulate people's, like sort of doing a Magneto variant of hand-to-hand combat, and it's really cool.
Yeah, that was amazing.
And then finally how he kind of finishes it off mostly with Storm blows everyone into a different train car, and Magneto just scrunches all of them, and that's great.
Yeah, and then just tosses the whole train car away and just walks off like a badass. I love that freaking scene.
Even though we completely ignore the fact that Jean like ripped his helmet apart and stabbed him with it, like that impacted him not even a little bit, so why have her do it in the first place?
Well, here's what she did. She didn't stab him. Well, she was caving the helmet in on him, but then she split it apart and used it as kind of like cufflinks to like latch onto him, and then just pushed him through the window.
Is that what happened?
Yeah, she's not stabbing him with those bits. They're wrapping around him almost like cufflinks, almost like bands.
I must have like not caught that
Yeah,
vision.
he's not getting stabbed with that. I think like watch one of the TV spots or one of the trailers where she does that. She's not stabbing him with those bits of the helmet. She's wrapping the bits of the helmet around him and then just sends him flying through the window.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So there's that, and Nightcrawler gets to do some cool stuff in that scene as well. Although the way that we do it is pretty dumb. Or the way that we get there.
It's almost like it's not as cringy as why'd you say that name from BBS? But it is hilarious. It might be the most unintentionally hilarious scene in the entire film.
Yeah, it's just so they're captured. One of the guards walks by and is like, "My son's a huge fan," and it's like he just tosses it out casually, like it's not made a point of or anything. Like the scene doesn't focus on it. He just kind of says it, and then that guy gets shot, and Kurt's like, "No, no, don't die," and then he dies, and then he just snaps and loses it and starts going ham on all these aliens, and it looks cool, but it's so dumb.
It's super out of character for Nightcrawler. He's not an outright murderer, and but to see him just do that and then teleport one of the aliens in front of the train and then teleport away with that evil demonic grin on his face, that was hilarious. I could not contain my laughter.
And like I remember like seeing that expression on his face in the TV spots and the trailers and stuff, and like noticing that there's this woman in front of him, and I'm like, wait, who is that? What is the context for this? Of all the contexts that I imagined, leaving someone on a train track to get run over by a train was not one of them.
uh,
But yeah, there was something. Man, I had a point, and then I. Oh yeah, you mentioned about the whole like murdering thing. Is it me or is it's I'm trying to think back because I don't think we've ever had the X-Men in like this branch of movies be all that like okay with murdering people. Like we got rid of Apocalypse because there was no other way. But aside from that, I feel like Charles and the X-Men as a whole have been generally like, no, we're not gonna do that. Like even
well, we kind of just let Wolverine skewer people and we don't really address it, and I think it's kind of easy to forget for the casual audience member considering that there's not blood flying everywhere like there is in Logan.
yeah, it's
But Wolverine is definitely killing people throughout these movies.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like these movies, quote unquote, these after First Class.
Oh, after First Class. Well,
And also, you have to keep in mind, we're very clever with the Wolverine stuff. He's always stabbing and like slicing and dicing people when like the rest of the X-Men aren't around.
or for that one scene in Apocalypse where like the new kind of kid X-Men just stand off to the side while he's just murders his way through that place.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like it's not like we ever have a scene where anyone makes a big deal out of it, where it's like we don't kill people. But it felt kind of weird to me to have a whole like intense action scene where we're just murdering these aliens because they happen to be aliens.
Yeah, they wanted a big like cannon fodder action scene to show off everyone's powers. You can't do it with real people because that's just not Xavier's you know that's not his mo. So we made aliens, and I mean, I'm not gonna knock this movie for that. Avengers did it. Um, really, all with all three movies. We had aliens, and then robots, and then aliens again. So I mean, it's pretty commonplace for this kind of genre thing. Um, but I really liked it because we got some great action out of it.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It's pretty good fighting. But
Well, I want to talk to you about the score. Hans Zimmer scores this movie. I really like the score. Like the main theme in the beginning, and then particularly when it comes back for the train car sequence,
yeah,
and it's a little more triumphant. I thought that theme was so cool. It reminded me, like, just tonally, it reminded me of the few X-Men comics that I did read. Where just like that theme like felt to me, it felt synonymous with X-Men. It felt like almost instantly iconic with X-Men, and it made me wish that that was just the theme for all these movies.
Yeah, that theme is the only piece that I've listened to myself so far, but it's really cool, and it's a little bit of a shame to not have the last movie in the franchise end with the John Ottman theme, but this stuff is really, really good. And hey, remember back in 2016 when Hans Zimmer said he was done scoring superhero movies?
Yeah, well, I'm glad he lied to me. I'll be honest.
Yeah, but I've heard pretty much nothing but unanimous praise for the score, so that's one thing that everyone agrees this movie got pretty good.
For sure, yeah.
So, I don't know. Yeah, we've already talked about Nightcrawler, and sort of what we've talked about is the one thing that he has, the one character bit that he has in this whole movie. And him and Quicksilver, who got taken out, and Storm have like nothing to do. We give Storm like a token scene where she talks to Cyclops about how Jean is like a lost cause, which is like, okay, I thought you guys were friends, but it's like that then, is it? Although then again, she did have the whole hero worship thing from Mystique, and that's probably informing that because she just died.
Yeah. And she did see that happen.
Yeah.
I also, I mean, I know we talked about the Genosha scene, but to talk about that scene a little more specifically, I do like that we kind of do I mean, it skirts on being an action scene. It kind of sort of is one, but
the bit with the
yeah, the bit with the helicopters. I
yeah
thought that was really cool. It was a really cool and cost-effective way to do an action scene because Magneto controls metal, and she's a telekinetic. So they were basically able. I mean, aside from like digitally removing the rig that the helicopters were under, they were able to do that scene pretty much practically.
yeah
And
I like it
they
too.
they both really sell it, like with the hand gestures and the veins popping out of Michael Fassbender's neck and him screaming. Like they really sell that they're like telekinetically battling.
Yeah, this is a bit of a weird thing where in execution I can appreciate the acting and the sort of technical efficiency of it. On paper, though, I don't think there's anything particularly interesting or impressive about the scene where it's like, okay, I've seen both of these characters move objects around before, and now they're struggling over it, like against each other, and all right, it's not really anything I haven't seen before.
Well, that's fair, but we haven't really seen anyone go up in direct opposition to Magneto's power.
And like succeed. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice little establishing just how powerful she is. But yeah, and I don't know. And again, part of this is I can't be totally objective because I've seen Last Stand and I can't erase that movie from my memory, and I have already a sort of gauge for how powerful Phoenix Jean is, so that doesn't really surprise me. So
Um, I really liked. Well, I mean, I always like Michael Fassbender in this movie. Well, in these movies, he's he might be my favorite casting choice out of all the new people that they got since First
yeah,
Class.
he's definitely.
Of course, James McAvoy is wonderful as Xavier too,
Yeah.
but this Magneto will always stick with me, and this will be the rendition I'm saddest to see go now that MCU is going to be using the X-Men at some
Maybe
point.
it's just like inherently the kind of inherent pathos to the character, but I feel like that's true of both sort of sub franchises, where Magneto, even when he's not written the best, like Apocalypse and debatably good movie, both Fassbender and McKellen
They
are
kill it.
they're always the MVPs of the cast whenever they show up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like those two actors really get something in the character even when the writing doesn't, and they're always able to pull out something stellar.
Yeah, they brought it. I mean, even in that little scene where Jean first gets there and Magneto is just drilling into her, whose blood is that?
Yeah, like he's really intense. Debatably a bit too intense. Like that is like if someone has blood on them and like they're coming to you for help, maybe that's not the correct approach to getting answers out of them, but then again, it's Eric, so
We haven't talked a lot about Xavier in this film.
yeah,
How do you feel about how his moral ambiguity is played and what we do with him here?
I feel it's really like I feel like the movie doesn't know entirely what it wants to say with him. Where
I Same,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, we do kind of oversimplify it, where right after Mystique dies, um, like Hank is like pleading with Charles, just admit that you were wrong, admit that this was your fault, admit that you messed up, and then like when we get right before the train car sequence where they all start fighting the aliens, Xavier finally is like, you know what, I admit it, I was wrong, but I'm not the one that put this Phoenix Force entity inside of her, and right now there are people trying to kill her, and we need to help her.
yeah. Like okay, I almost isn't that it's too simple, but that it's too complicated. Where it's like, if that's supposed to be the arc of Charles is realizing he was wrong specifically for putting the Phoenix.
Suppressing her memories.
But that's the thing. Is it supposed to be he's wrong for suppressing her memories, or he's wrong for putting her on the space mission and that's what gets her the Phoenix Force, or both? Or because if the space mission doesn't happen and she doesn't get the Phoenix Force, even though again we keep saying this, she already has it from the ending of Apocalypse. Ignoring that, if that mission doesn't go exactly the way that it does, then who's to say that nothing bad happens and her memories just stay repressed forever, and Charles never has to deal with that? And so it's like, what? And again, we make a point of like when she has the either really horrifying or really hilarious, depending on who you ask, scene where she like forces him to walk up the stairs, and she looks into his mind and sees that the big thing that he was repressing was that her dad didn't want her anymore. I kind of feel like he's justified in repressing that.
So am I, and I have my big issue with that is Mystique acts like he's just the most despicable person on the planet for suppressing those memories and lying to her, but she doesn't exactly offer like the alternative being better. Like, oh, she's not like, what you should have done was tell her, yeah, you basically killed your mother, and your dad wants nothing to do with you. Do you want to come live with me? Like, is that really the approach you wanted him to take?
Yeah, it's just I don't the the movie wants to be so many different things, and like it doesn't ever really position a character as the right to Charles is wrong. It thinks it's doing it with Mystique, but it's not really, because her points don't entirely make sense.
They don't make sense, and then she dies, so she can't really defend those points at any point later in the movie.
Yeah, and then it's kind of trying to do it with Hank in that one scene, but we'll get to Hank. Like, put a pin in Hank for a minute.
Yikes.
But the thing is, like, what is the issue supposed to be here? Is it supposed to be A, him repressing Jean's memories, and that's wrong inherently because he has no right to do that? B, him sending her to space? because that's like putting like the X-Men in situations that they're not prepared for, and that's like his ego? Or is it C, just generally Charles has kind of gotten a swollen head and is kind of prioritizing like keeping his dream of human mutant relations alive over the well-being of the X-Men? And it's like, again, we have to ignore the ending of Apocalypse for either of those last two to work, because we end Apocalypse on the note of, okay, this is what you all signed up for, is you're gonna be put in situations like this. Fine, whatever. Let's ignore that. But like, what is the lesson that Charles really had to learn here? Because it doesn't seem like it's just, I was wrong about this one thing. It seems like the movie's trying to make it seem like everything he does is a mistake, and it's like, that's too much. You've got to
That
give,
is way too much.
like, you give him like a clear arc, and also two, three, four other things going on that are wrong with him, and not all of them like tie together naturally.
So he's wrong for sending Jean in to help the astronauts,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also wrong for suppressing Jean's memory. Like,
He's also wrong with memory, even though he's not really, because the memory he suppressed would have been really bad for her to know about anyway. So
I mean, is it really so bad that he repressed it, as opposed to he just never got around to unsuppressing it or telling her about it at all? Like,
yeah, exactly.
I just want to know, like, what was Mystique's like better alternative to what Charles did?
And you know what? I think I think there's maybe a way to make it less confused. Not like it's still a problem just because there's so much going on. But I'm just thinking about it now, how you can maybe make it less like so weirdly black hat, like what's going on specifically with the memory repression, where it's like he represses the fact that her father is actually still alive. I think an easier way to get around that would be like, he doesn't repress that memory, he just straight up lies about it. As in, like, for whatever reason, something happens, the
Now that he actually did lie about.
yeah, but I mean, like, the way that I would do it is the car crash happens, somehow Jean just doesn't find out that her father is alive, and Charles has the opportunity to tell her but doesn't. And we keep the thing where he had the discussion with her father where he's like,
But
there's no hope.
she asked about it though.
But see, here's the thing, is like, she wouldn't ask about it, but also because we know she can read minds, do a thing where like, she maybe could have read Charles' mind to find out, like, oh no, her parents are still alive. Charles wasn't suppressing her, he was keeping her out of his head to be like, I know something that I don't want you to find out. I'm not gonna like mess with your mind, but I'm gonna do everything I can to keep you from ever getting it from me. And so that's still a debate about like, okay, should you have told her, should you not have, her best interests or what? But it doesn't go into this weird place of like messing with her mind and infringing on her rights, and it's really weird.
Especially because the Phoenix is the big contrivance that we have for breaking down those mental barriers.
Yeah. So just like have it be like, and if you want to still have it be Phoenix related, have it be okay. Now because of the Phoenix, she's more powerful than Charles, and she can like bypass whatever thing he's got and look into his mind. And so it's not Charles messed with her head, it's just he lied.
I will say one of the creepiest and most effective scenes. Again, like, maybe this isn't super impressive or whatever, but I thought it was really well done. Is Jean making Charles walk? That was hard to watch.
Yeah. Some people, that's the thing where me, that was also like the intended way. It's like uncomfortable. I'm like, oh no. But some people found it laughable, and I'm like, I can't really fault you that just because it's a little bit of it's for one, it comes nowhere, and that's part of why it works for me. But I can see it being like, okay, now we're doing this, right? This is I'm not sure how to feel about this, and maybe taking it kind of not as the movie wants you to take it.
Both that and the Genosha scene with the helicopters do feel kind of fan filmy almost in a way, or it's like we want to convey something without really using any effects. So we'll just do it in camera, and either you'll roll with it or you won't.
Yeah, and for a problem, uh, yeah, I do think maybe a case to be made for like I don't know if we really earned this moment or if it really makes complete character sense that Jean would do this. And again, this is the closest we ever get in the whole movie to Jean becoming Dark Phoenix. And so if they like thought to have it in there for that reason, but it's like, yeah, take that moment out and Jean is pretty much wholly a guy through the whole film, even as she gets kind of manipulated by these aliens. And let's talk about these aliens. Actually, okay, you know what? We have an opportunity here because we've already brought it up. We could talk about the aliens or we could talk about Hank.
Um, I kind of want to talk about Hank first because the
Yeah,
aliens are so nothing. Like there's almost nothing to talk about in terms of the aliens.
they're they're nothing characters. They're terrible villains. The end, I guess. But Hank, oh boy, like him, Hank has always been kind of a more cynical character than Charles, and we've been consistent about that movie to movie, where he's like, he sees the worst in a lot of situations, and he's willing to make some more difficult choices than Charles is. And we have the whole thing where he loved Raven, but to have his reaction to Raven getting killed by Jean be, I'm gonna go to Eric and hope that Eric helps me kill Jean. Nope, 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 nope. I don't care. Character officially assassinated. That does not work even a little bit.
I could not agree more, man. That is not Hank.
He,
That's not. I don't know who that character is, but he's not Hank.
yeah, it's really, really bad. That's one of the things, like, I want to be in the writer's room, like, who had this idea, and, like, at what point were they like, yep, this works, this makes sense.
I think there might be only two reasons that we moved Hank this way. The first reason probably being we need a way for Magneto to find out that Raven was killed by Jean since he wasn't there and he doesn't have his own Cerebro. He's basically just been sitting in discount Genosha for whoever knows how long.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other big reason that we do this to Hank is because crap, I lost my second point.
You're thinking just to the first point of, like, that's how Eric finds out. Again, we're really, really vague to the point of, like, it not being a thing at all as to how and if this thing is affecting Jean mentally, because it kind of comes right the heck out of nowhere when Eric is like, the people show up and Eric's like, stay here, and he to deal with them, and he's like, whoever you're looking for, they're not here. And Jean just comes out with like this display of power, and it's like, it's me, I'm here. It's like, I'm not sure it makes any sense for you to do that. Is this scene to imply that the Phoenix is like affecting your personality? If that's the case, then we could just end that scene with her being like, it's Raven's blood. I think there's any number of ways you could have her just come out and answer Eric's question and then leave before he has time to process it. So like you don't have to contrive a whole thing where Beast shows up just to tell him that.
That is true. But maybe the writers were so like not forward thinking that they didn't even think of that.
Ah,
Um, I remember my second point. I think the second reason potentially why we just assassinated Hank on a character level the way we did is because we want more internal opposition within the X-Men because once Mystique is dead, I feel like the movie wants more dramatic scenes with core members of the X-Men and Charles, and um, that's what Hank being kill crazy for Jean. That's why that's there. I feel
and I
that kitchen scene with them where he's all like mad at Charles for not being able to admit that he was wrong, and that Mystique being dead is his fault. I think the movie wants that scene really badly, and it wants Hank to function as opposition for the X-Men, which is why he's helping Magneto fight them off when he goes to kill Jean. I think that's also another reason why they had Hank go on a revenge quest for
yeah,
this guy.
and also two things. I will say that scene between uh Hank and Charles at that table, really good acting. I think that's a really, really well played scene.
Yeah, I believe every moment of it from an acting standpoint.
Yeah, and secondly, if that was the idea, I wouldn't even be worried about Hank. I would make the internal opposition between Charles and Scott.
Especially because we know there was some of that in the movie because I watched an interview with Simon Kinberg, the director of the film, and he talks about that scene that's in the trailer where Scott says, "Tell me what to do," and Xavier just cuts him off and screams, "I don't know what to do."
Yeah, that line read. But yeah, what did they mention about that?
He said he really liked that scene and felt that it was a really strong, powerful bit of acting from both the actors, but it didn't fit in the movie.
Uh, yeah, it's just like because again, part of this we've talked a lot about Jean and how she's not really well defined and how that's kind of an Achilles heel to this story. But Scott also, like he should be for most of the movie, I feel like the way that you naturally do this story is uh Jean is the character that the audience sympathize with because she's going through all these problems, and Scott is the character that they empathize with and kind of like relate to. Like I get it. The past three movies have all been to varying degrees movies about Charles, Eric, or Raven. But now that we've got Scott, the proper like leader of the X-Men set up, I think this movie should have been his. I think Jean should have been like the focal point of the story, but Scott should have been the guy that the audience follows in terms of like he's really the one most affected by this and the one with the most drive to like fix the problem. And you can have Charles and Eric and Hank and whoever play major roles, but for someone who should have, I think, been this movie's protagonist, Scott is not nothing, but he's got so little to work with. And to have him be opposed to Charles on some level, as like how do you deal with Jean? It's like that's the obvious way to go with it, and they just do it.
Which is a shame because I really like that actor. I think he's delivering a solid performance throughout this whole movie, even though we can't even see his eyes. I thought he was really good.
Yeah, like Ty Sheridan, fine, he's great, but like, ah,
Yeah, just I think the big term that can be thrown at this movie, even with as much as I enjoyed it, even though I didn't think it was great, wasted potential.
yeah, and like you got if I'm not trust just the team and the fact that Simon Kinberg was a first-time director, and other stuff that he's taken part in that has been not great. But
And that I was going to mention that with the action in particular, but I don't think this is a poorly directed film at all. I think it's actually directed pretty solid.
but I'm just saying, putting aside that personally would have led to a much better movie, you have to wonder how different this movie would be if they knew going in that it was going to be the last one. Because quite a lot of this was done over a year ago. Like, I recall early 2017 hearing about screenings and plot points for this movie that ended up being totally accurate. And so that just goes to show the extent to which they pushed it off. And so, like,
Yeah. On top of that, when we got the first poster, it said February on it.
yeah.
Like this movie was slated to come out in February.
And that was before, like, any of the Disney Fox stuff was like solidly done. And so you gotta wonder, like, if you told them when they'd started, okay, this is gonna be your last shot, what they would have changed, what they would have kept, what they would it have been, would they have done Dark Phoenix at all coming off of Apocalypse? I don't know. But you know what? I also, because we kind of like skipped over them just because there's so little to talk about. I do actually want to talk about the aliens insofar as they're all like blank slate, nothing characters. Jessica Chastain's the only one with a name, and it only comes up once in subtitles. She's giving a real nothing performance. She has nothing to work with. Do you have the thing that I have, where like this being the last one and just this far into this franchise, it feels really out of place to even have aliens?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Um, I I have a hard time being all that angry because of that amazing action scene they give us in the third act.
Yeah,
But
I'm not.
um,
It's just this thing that like underlies the movie and is like, this feels wrong. Like, this doesn't feel like one of these X-Men movies.
well, yeah, I mean, for the most part, they've all been going for a more grounded tone than in MCU, kind of. But yeah, I mean, introducing aliens this far in, like, I guess it would feel jarring to the average layman who doesn't really keep up with this kind of genre of thing. My aunt wasn't too perturbed at all by the fact that these were aliens. She was just following the movie. But
Also,
yeah,
no
go
one
ahead.
quit. Like, have the bit where Charles reads Jessica Chastain and is like, "What are you?" So, like, clearly he picks up that this person isn't human or mutant, and
Yeah, because his telepathy doesn't work on them.
okay, okay, is that what that's meant to imply? So,
Yeah, that's made clear because in
oh,
her first interaction with Jean,
right,
she has everyone else seeing her as an old man, and the alien lady's the only one that can tell that she's actually Jean.
right. Okay, I remember that. But yeah, it's really strange that no one like has any strong reaction to these being aliens. Does anyone but Jean even find out explicitly? Like, it's just such a weird thing to think about, where it's like the way that all these X-Men movies have been, it's all been human versus mutant, human versus mutant. Even Apocalypse on some level is human versus mutant.
And like, and yeah, it does make sense that you would finally want to throw a wrench in that and change things up as opposed to doing that same kind of thing over and over again.
Yeah,
But it just wasn't done well.
yeah, it's just as the last movie, and also just as it's weird as the last movie to have the conflict be a third party, where it's all mutants versus the third party and humans. Well, I guess you could argue with the guards, humans kind of play a role, but like, if you're gonna do it, execution. My idea for that premise would be, okay, the last X-Men movie in this franchise, humans and mutants finally come together to deal with something that is apart from both of them. And then you kind of, that's even building on what Trask was talking about in Days of Future Past, where it's like, okay, the only way we can unite everyone is with a common enemy. All right, we want to unite humans and mutants with something that is the common enemy to both. Make, again, that should be a thing where make First Contact with aliens in this universe its own movie. Don't make it like a backdrop for a Phoenix story.
And again, like this movie was not something that was going to win hearts and minds from premise alone, because they didn't have any of the setup to do this story in the first place. I know you said like this story can effectively be done like in a way that would be satisfying to most fans of the original storyline in 2 hours. I have a really hard time agreeing with that, with what I know from that story. First, because it lasts so long. Like Dark Phoenix is essentially black suit Spider-Man. Like Spider-Man has the black suit for kind of a long time before it finally overtakes him, and he almost becomes Venom. So he gets rid of the suit, and then Eddie gets it, and he becomes Venom. Like Dark Phoenix is that story that just, you need the build up, you need the setup and the payoff, you need like time to spend with the characters and fully fleshing them out and developing them and building a status quo so that you can knock it down later and it feels earned.
Yeah. Like, just on that note, and this isn't specific to this movie, but I feel like I'm gonna keep bringing this up until it happens. Like, every superhero movie ever, basically, like, all of the high-profile ones have been set in a very relatively short time frame. Like, I can't think of a superhero movie that takes place over more than a couple days, excluding Endgame, where we do one big time jump. I wanna see someone do a superhero movie where we like basically, just because this just came into my head as an example of this, do like 500 Days of Summer, but as a superhero movie. Like, tell a story where we jump a little bit in time and then we tell some more of the story and then we jump a little bit more. Like, do a superhero movie where it feels like time is passing, maybe like a couple months, maybe even a couple of years over the course of a movie. I just don't know why no one has thought to do that. Where like, maybe it would have to be 2.5 or 3 hours instead of 2 hours, but like, you could do like an X-Men movie that's like not just some big status quo shift and then a couple of days of aftermath from that. You could do like the X-Men doing a thing, having like a saga within a movie or two that's like, let's jump around a little bit, let's spend some time.
I feel like what you're suggesting suits a miniseries better than it does a movie.
Maybe, but like, non-super movies do it all the time. Like, it's not like it's this weird, untested alien concept to set a movie over more than a couple of days.
Oh, that's true. At the same time, what you're talking about, though, I don't.
With
That seems almost too exaggerated. Like,
with Phoenix and Dark Phoenix specifically, I would absolutely not just do it as a movie or two. Like, that's gotta be a long form thing. You're right.
but at the end of the day, I think this is a movie that was. I think no matter what way you slice it, this movie was not going to satisfy most people. Like, because whether you like it or not, it didn't have a good starting point from Apocalypse in the first place. And
Yeah.
so to do a story that really required like some meat and potatoes and some setup, and not really have any of that, was, I think, detrimental.
Yeah. That because I mean, like, I agree, 100% I agree, but I don't want to make it sound like
Everything needs to be Marvel.
not even that. I just don't want to make it sound like no matter where they went with it, this series was unsalvageable after Apocalypse, just because that movie was the way it was. And that's kind of the way that we're making it sound, and I don't want it to sound like that, where it's like, because Apocalypse was so faulty, no matter what they did afterwards was going to be impacted by that. Maybe that's true, but you never want to think like, oh, well, after Apocalypse, these movies were a lost cause anyway, so.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's true, especially because, like, I know you like Last Stand, and even I like Last Stand more than a lot of people do. But like a lot of people were saying, there's no way in hell that we'd ever get another like really great X-Men movie that would top X-Men 2.
Especially,
and we got Days of Future Past.
Especially with the 1-2 punch of that and Origins, people were generally like, oh, there's no way we're even getting a good X-Men movie again. And then we got 3 really good ones right in a row afterward, with First Class, The Wolverine, and Days of Future Past. So, yeah. So, like, it's not like coming off of Apocalypse, you couldn't have salvaged it somehow, but maybe get a different creative team, or just take a different approach. Something had to be done.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, like...
I will say, though, I love, I mean, I love both those characters, so, I mean, it's kind of hard for me to not love this scene regardless, but the ending scene with Professor X and Magneto just, you know, playing checkers out in the open.
Okay, I want to talk about it, because this is going to be another thing, and I already feel bad because, like, we're winding down here, but I kind of feel like you obviously like this movie, not necessarily a lot, but a fair bit, and I feel like I've kind of, I don't know, I feel like my more negative vibe to it has really overwhelmed this discussion, and we've spent a lot of time being negative on it, but I don't mind the scene just as a scene. I think it's a good scene between the two of them as sort of like the last scene of this movie and like a profound bookends to like this part of the franchise. I don't think it works just because these two characters in this movie have talked to each other maybe twice before now. And like obviously this is a sequel where we're counting all of their relationship and stuff in the past movie and letting that inform this, but like you said, on some level we have to take this as its own movie, and taking it as that, I don't think it really makes sense for these two characters to be the note that we end on.
That is true. I'm in full agreement with you there, Nick. I don't think, like, looking at this as its own film, it does not make sense to end with the two of them, especially the way we do.
Mm-hmm.
But to be the last scene that we get left on with these actors in this incarnation of the franchise,
Yeah.
I think you're not going to get much better than that.
Yeah, you gotta, like I mentioned, you gotta assume, or at least I assume on some level, that they made that the last scene at a...
Because they knew it would be the last one.
Yeah, at that stage they had to know they weren't going to get the chance to make any more.
So I'm glad that's the final scene that we're left with in this version of the X-Men.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've said all I can say, and the more I think about it, the...
Yeah, I feel like we've hit it pretty well, and if we were to keep talking, we'd just be talking in circles.
Yeah.
But I do want to leave people with this. I liked this movie. It's objectively, I don't think it is a good movie. I really don't. But I enjoyed myself watching it. I had a good time watching it both times, despite those issues. I do think it's better than a number of films that we've had in the franchise before, but yeah, I know that's not really saying a lot. I would say if you have any investment in the X-Men as a property whatsoever, you should see it at least once. Like, I don't know. I think you should see it at least once. Not in the theater. Maybe not waste your hard-earned money in the theater. But once it comes out on VOD or something, just give it a watch.
Yeah. It's going back because like way earlier, I think you might have mentioned like not hating the movie. I don't hate it either. I definitely dislike it. There are things to appreciate in it. Even if they're things that I don't necessarily like, there are things that I can definitely see someone else liking. I think there's less of that than, like I mentioned, Last Stand or even Origins, just because I've gone back to Origins like recently to do the list, and I don't know, I picked up on a lot of like little like self-contained things in that movie that work for me. And I don't really have that with this one. I don't think I hate any of the X-Men movies. Like none of them make me angry. None of them feel like big insults to my intelligence the way that something like BVS does. Or like, I don't know, what's another like really bad comic book movie?
Catwoman.
Yeah, Catwoman, something like that. Like, this isn't that to where it's just, I don't understand why anyone thought this was a good idea. It's just kind of bleh.
There.
Like, not even just there. Like, somewhere between you know what? I'll say this: the very first one of these, the very first 2000 X-Men, that's a
Mm-hmm.
movie that's just there for me. Every other movie in the franchise is somewhere along like the spectrum, where it's like Origins is not. It's a little below just there. It's like there's positives and negatives, and it creates this weird mess that just makes me go, eh. And here, it's another weird mess that just makes me go, eh, but I feel like there's less positives. Where it's like, it doesn't bore me to tears like Apocalypse did, but I feel like I might have the thing that I have with Apocalypse where if I attempt to go back and watch this a second or third time, I'm not going to be able to finish it. Because I have that with Apocalypse. Like Apocalypse, I can't finish just because I know what don't care for any of it. And I
I
think
had the same thing, bro. I really did. Like, um, I was going back and rewatching some of the X-Men movies myself in preparation for this, and I got like maybe all of 34 minutes into Apocalypse and just turned it off.
yeah, about the time shows up is the movie's just gonna meander for 20 minutes and then when it gets back to Apocalypse, like who cares? Yeah, so I don't know. I think I may try it when it's available for like for me to buy and watch and stuff. I may try that and be proven wrong, but I foresee myself attempting to watch this movie in the future and not being able to finish it just because it's kind of nothing to me.
Real quick, before we wrap up, I do want to ask if there's any kind of speculation that you have in regards to how this franchise is going to be handled when Marvel takes over.
Uh, well, being put on the spot, there's not a lot that immediately comes to mind. I think given time to think about it, this could maybe be its own like video topic, but just off the top of my head, I think they might not necessarily do like specifically Kitty Pride or specifically Jubilee, but I think enough people have suggested it and it makes enough sense to where it would be like in Marvel's best interest to do like let's do one mutant preferably or probably like one of the younger female mutants to be like the eyes in as we discover like the new version of uh Xavier's Academy. And like let's make them the main character. Let's not do what we've been doing where we have either Logan or Charles be the protagonist. Let's have a younger mutant. Let's have someone who's really new to the whole world of what this is and be the main character. And I think that's what the MCU is likely to do with it.
Yeah, maybe. With the recent trailer that they've shown us for Spider-Man: Far From Home and the whole multiverse thing, I think that's how they'll contrive mutants and the X-Men into the MCU.
We'll
And
see.
you know how I feel about them even making X-Men movies in the MCU in the first place. I've always been of the opinion that, yeah, while it is cool to see Wolverine interacting with Captain America and all that, the X-Men has always made more sense as its own thing and not in Marvel, because with the whole like prejudice against mutants thing and people with powers, people don't hate Spider-Man in the same way they hate mutants. People don't hate like no one knows. I mean, the government knows, but
There's like
people don't know that Hulk was created with gamma radiation, that he's not a mutant. Like,
yeah,
it's just we play really fast and loose with how we're treating superpower people. When you have both people with powers who are in the Avengers and then also X-Men, it's real messy, and it doesn't like line up and track, and it doesn't actually make sense.
I think that you could make it make sense. Only you'd have to do a thing that these movies kind of skirt around and never really like make the big issue, which is that if mutants are like a sign of evolution, then you would have a sect of people who naturally hates them as like humans are just like generally instinctually opposed to change, and this idea that you could be like not
Usurped,
yeah
like replaced.
yeah, usurped as like the prime species. And like if you were gonna do that, like the X-Men movie I would make would be all about people asking, are mutants and humans different species to begin with? And everyone taking a different stance on that issue. And like if the MCU wanted to just have there be mutant prejudice, then you could just do, all right, that's where the prejudice comes from. People really do think that humans and mutants are not the same like life form, and that one is going to usurp the other, and that terrifies people. Then you have something that you can work with that makes more sense than just like, oh, they look weird and they have powers and stuff.
And my big question is, like, what do they do for Magneto? Because, as we're like the MCU more or less moves in real. Well, now with that 5-year time jump, they don't actually move in real time anymore.
Yeah.
But like, you can't. There's only so much longer you can get away with having, the whole Nazi thing be Magneto's backstory.
Unless this is, oh boy, this would be very loaded, and there's no way that the MCU would do it. But because Magneto being like old is itself kind of a retconny type thing, where like implications were in like early comics that Magneto was not like a man, but like he and Charles weren't like aged, like they were a generation older than the others. Like Magneto was kind of a young guy. You could do young Magneto, young-ish Magneto, who still dealt with Nazis but is dealing with neo-Nazis and like contemporary fascists. Like you could do that. I don't think the MCU would, but you could definitely do that as like a point of like, oh, you like the thing that makes it so antiquated is like World War II. We thought that it's building on the idea of like, oh, you think Nazis were like exclusive to World War II and then we got rid of them and then that's it? Nope. Turns out Nazis like pervade throughout modern history and they're not gone. And that could even inform Magneto's character to where he's like, I was victimized by this group of people that everyone else thought they just got rid of and weren't even a problem anymore. And then they took me and ruined my life and my family's life anyway. And what are people doing about it? And now they want to get rid of us, the mutants? Hell no.
And I think if you were to tie tie it into Hydra, you can
Yeah,
maybe do some cool stuff with him and Bucky.
especially since you have some people, not a lot, but some people who complain about like the fact that Hydra are Nazis not being explicit enough or talked about enough in the movies as it is. Like
Yeah,
that,
you don't really get any of that outside of the first Avenger.
yeah, like the closest we get to it is Agents of Shield, where we actually have people like throwing the word Nazi around, and so like it's never gonna happen. But I would really respect even if they just did it as like a weird thing in comics or like in a cartoon, any adaptation that like bites the bullet and says, let's do contemporary Magneto dealing with post World War II Nazis and how that was and still is a thing. Any adaptation that did that would have infinite respect from me.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, but that's like I don't know, like if I kept thinking about it, I could come up with like all sorts of very specific stuff that I would do for X-Men. I'm gonna say I feel like we're gonna watch Far From Home and we're gonna find out that the whole multiverse thing is a hoax. Not necessarily that there is no multiverse because we know that alternate timelines exist, but I don't think the multiverse as we're thinking about it is gonna be what it seems like in Far From Home. Because I think people like you are expecting Far From Home to be like the thing that we use to sort of like backdoor an excuse to do X-Men and multiverse stories and like people coming from other universes. I don't think that's gonna happen. I think we're gonna end Far From Home and be like, oh, the multiverse as we thought we understood it because of like Quentin Beck and stuff is gonna be a complete non-issue, non-thing. It's a hoax. And like if we do multiverses, it's either gonna show up later or we're gonna handle it differently. And I think the X-Men, I don't know.
I do think some type of multiverse is how we introduce X-Men, because even though that's, really easy and contrived and comic booky, I'll take that over them having the audacity to just throw mutants into the movies and pretend like they've always been there. I would be livid if they did that.
I wouldn't care either. My preferred thing, and this would like open the door to the stuff that I was mentioning earlier, like that kind of discussion, but it would also sort of be a bit of an ask just because, we need Xavier School to be a thing that exists. I think what would kind of not necessarily make sense, but be the more interesting, least contrived option would just be to say mutancy is like super recent and like look at mutants, the first mutants developing for the first time contemporarily. Like you could maybe even say if they wanted to, because I didn't even think about this. We've got like a 5 year stretch of completely off screen stuff that we don't know what happened. It would be way less. I would be way less angry with what you suggest now, which is like saying that mutants have been around than I would be pre-Endgame, where it's like, okay, mutants weren't around all the time, but you could say something happened, unlocked the mutant gene in some young adults. Some people are just getting born with it now in the past 5 years. Maybe it was dormant in some people. Whatever. Recently, there are mutants, some of whom are youngish adults, some of whom are just being born and very, very, very young.
But that doesn't really make sense for Magneto unless he happened to be one of the token people who was a mutant even before that happened.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. Like, do young-ish Magneto, young-ish Charles, like, have it be where when we're introduced to, I don't know. I think that would be a decent like throwback to the comics and also just a not like forced way to differentiate from the movies to where when we introduce the audiences to Xavier's school and Magneto and stuff, have them be like 30s, early 40s at the oldest. Like, why not?
Yeah, I can see your point. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, like there's no like Kevin Feige has talked about how like he's had ideas, but they were not even legally allowed to like brainstorm ideas for the X-Men until the Fox or Fantastic Four until the Fox deal went through until the ink was dry on that. So it's gonna be 3 to 5 years at least until we have like hide or hair of a mutant in these movies. I'm convinced of that. It's gonna be a long wait before we're even setting X-Men up, I think.
Yeah, probably.
And so we'll see what happens 4, 5, 6 years when we finally get an X-Men movie in the MCU. But until then, I don't know. Any number of things could happen.
For sure.
So yeah, that's about it. And we've said all we had to say about this movie. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. I think this was really fun. This is one of the most fun conversations I feel like we've had in a while.
Yeah. In a weird way, I don't know if we ever even saw Hellboy, but I'm glad we didn't actually end up talking about that movie.
Yeah, that's one of those things I feel like that wouldn't be the most fun to talk about. But I was surprised how much I enjoyed just talking about this movie. If nothing else, the X-Men series ended on a movie that's worth talking about.
Yeah, we had a pretty, I would say, intuitive discussion, even though this movie's not great.
Yeah.